I think we need to stand up and acknowledge a real trailblazer and pioneer, Dean Edmonds. Give him a hand. Please stand up. Give him a standing ovation for his wonderful efforts and work. And Dean, clearly, grades were not a criteria for this award. For me, but I am extremely honored. I want to thank my fellow honorees for being here tonight as well. And I heard a previous speaker talk about the back row in class and the first day of property. Several of us rushed to the back row, and Professor, of course, noticed that. And he said, you know what, why don't we call on the back row folks first? And so for the folks that are going to come behind us, that are going to rush to the back row, just keep that story in mind. I also want to thank BALSA. I tell you, in my day, if you didn't pay your BALSA dues, they talked about you at school. And so the one thing I made sure I did quite a bit was pay my BALSA dues. For those who have not paid up, who are in class, and in this room you need to pay up. No one's going to point you out or call you out. Looks like this young lady's about to do that. But please do that so they don't talk about you. I'm a DC guy, and on the weekends I used to go home quite a bit, or I hung out in Philadelphia with my friends. But I remember there was a clinic that was offered, and I think Widener still has some of the best clinics in the country, if I'm not.
That's right.
And one of the clinics where you would go around to different law firms or government agencies, and I chose to go to a juvenile detention center outside of Philadelphia. And I was the only person of color in my class, and I was the only person that raised my hand for that particular location. And my law school car was, if you remember the old C-class Benz, the little small Benz? I mean, you could get a Honda that was more expensive than that Benz. And I had that little Benz, and it was all beat up. And I walked in the first day of juvenile detention, my juvenile detention work. A young man from Philadelphia who had been charged with some weapons charges, and he was in detention until trial, asked me, he said, because I was coming in to talk about everything from the law, which I really didn't know what to talk about, but I was more about mentoring. And he said, well, you must hustle. And I said, well, why do you think I hustle? He said, well, you have a Benz. And it struck me, obviously, because that young man, the only way you could have a Mercedes is to think that you had to sell drugs to do that. And clearly that's not the case. A lot of our young folks, it's not that they're not smart enough or not talented enough. They haven't been exposed to understanding what their life can be like if they open up their horizons. There's a place for those who either know DC or went to Howard. There's a place in DC called Anacostia, which is in the southeast part of our city. I happen to be an at-large member of the council, so I'm citywide. And one of the things that we try to teach our young folks, a lot of the young folks that live on the other side of the Anacostia River, have never seen a museum, but they see the monuments every day when they go to school because they can see them across the river. And we see, we get 40 million visitors in the District of Columbia every year. And they're coming from all over the country to look at the monuments and look in the museums. And some of our young people never even get a chance to see those things, so it's hard to ask our young folks to study hard and achieve and reach for the stars, but if you haven't been exposed to anything, it's tough to want to do that.
That's right.
So we have to do so much more with our young people and understanding, opening up opportunities for them so they can be exposed to other things. I have twin sons that are 18 years old, and they are heading off to college later this year. I took them to a college prep class in Vermont last summer, and I got so emotional just for that 6-week program. I had to go behind a tree. I have no idea how I'm going to be later this year when I take them, but I'm one of those extremely involved parents. Now, I'm not asking anybody to raise their hand what your party affiliation is, but do you remember the old Bush Patriot Act? Well, I have that in my house. I look through backpacks. I listen to phone conversations. I do whatever I need to do to understand what my kids are doing and who they're messing and hanging around with. Because I want them, you can only be a good enough parent. You can do the best job you can, but you can't control the folks they hang out with who aren't getting the same kind of parenting skills. And so what I want them to do, though, is when they get to that crossroad, that they hear my voice. If I do that, my father will bloop, bloop, bloop me. Because that's all you can do is just give your kids enough tools so they can make the right decision when they hit that crossroad. So law school for me was an interesting venture. I worked hard, I studied hard, I just never could quite get those kind of grades I wanted to get. So Dean Santoro, who was the dean when I was here, it was third year, and it was just after we came back from the Christmas holiday. And he called me to his office. I said, oh. Grade said, I was still hanging tough on the grade side. And the dean said, you know, Michael, we'd love for your father to be the commencement speaker. I said, oh yes, that means I'm going to graduate on time. So I didn't call my dad first. I didn't call his secretary. I said, yes, he will do that. I wanted to guarantee I was going to be graduating on time with no confusion, because I figured they wouldn't ask my dad to do that if I wasn't going to graduate. And so one of those things that I remember, my father at that time, he was chair of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, and he was going all over the country to do the kind of things he could do to get President Clinton at that time elected president. So I missed a lot of third year classes, and I remember saying to the dean, I said, Dean, you know, my father's trying to make history, do you mind, I'm probably going to miss some classes. He said, well, you know, you can take your books with you. And so I took my books with me, so I was studying on the road, doing everything I could. And though my stories are certainly much different than some of my fellow awardees, my stuff is not that deep. It's much lighter. But what Widener did for me, it did so much on keeping me humble, because law school can do that. First year makes you extremely humble. It's like my sister, when I won election in 2008, I got about 100,000 votes. And my sister said, 100,000 people voted for my stinky brother? And I said, yes, they did, Tracy. And my sister is a lawyer. She's at the Cochran firm in New York. She was at ADA in Los Angeles, and now she's at the Cochran firm. And she's I call her, and sorry for personal injury lawyers, but I tease her and call her an ambulance chaser. She says, I'm not an ambulance chaser, I'm a civil rights lawyer. Fight for folks' civil rights. That's okay. So I get to New York about once a week, because I kept my law practice, law practice in Washington. And I'm in New York, and I'm flicking around on the little remote. And my sister comes on for a commercial for the Cochran firm. And she says, if you're hurt or injured, dial 1-800 Cochran firm and we'll be there for you. And so I called her and I said, Tracy, you didn't mention you did a commercial talking about you're an ambulance chaser. I don't care what she does. Of course she sticks with it. She's a civil rights lawyer. I'm glad I also made it into the 90s, barely. I was a 1991 grad, and I lived in Claymont. Claymont was, I don't know what section of Wilmington that is, but it has an unbelievable cheesesteak place. Jessica and I went when we drove in from Washington, and we stopped there. And though the neighborhood has not changed, it looks like the people have. In the sense of, in the District of Columbia, I don't know if gentrification is alive and well in Wilmington or not, but it's alive and well in Washington. And what we're watching is how demographics and things are changing in DC like they are in other urban areas. My sister lives in Harlem, and she's noticing that demographics and people are changing in Harlem, just like things are changing in the District of Columbia and other urban places in our country. And so what we're trying to do is, as housing issues are, I know we had a housing clinic here at the law school, are some of the things that are so important, because unless you have real affordable housing for folks, for teachers and police officers and firefighters and retired people to live in our cities are going to turn into cities for the affluent, and you're not going to have that economic diversity. And that, again, when I'm on the stump in Washington and I'm talking about different things, adult job training programs or the like, I always go back to the clinics from here, because that's really what taught me and gave me my foundation. There are some folks that go to law school to want to go in court. My sister's one of those real lawyers, and I know some of my fellow honorees are real lawyers. Not me. I went to law school to learn how to write better and learn how to think differently. And that's what law school did for me. And Widener did that. And I am so proud to be a graduate of this wonderful university. And for Balsa and for Dean Edmonds, if the dean comes to your town, like she does when she comes to Washington, she calls and she says jump, and I say how high. Because I think it's important for us to keep the connection with the place that gives you your professional start. Because never get away, and then after that, as the dean will also call on you, is to give back to your university. Amen. Not just coming to speak at classes and going to your regional receptions, but you got to write some checks. Because if we don't do it and show our appreciation, it's going to be difficult for the university to continue to grow the way we want to. Some of the great universities, the reason they're so great is because they have those large endowments. They have those large ways that they can pay for scholarships to get kids here to go to school. So that's why it's important to give back to your university. I'm proud to be getting the Pioneer Trailblazer Award, so thank you very much for having me. Thank you.